Hello. How are you? I'm going to be reading today. It's been a little while since I've done that, and I really like reading and being read to. I think it's very calming and really helps me sleep, or fall asleep, that is. So, first, I want you to take a couple big deep breaths and whatever position you are in, as you inhale, I want you to stretch out your body, and then when you exhale, your body can return back to its normal, comfortable position. So I guess we'll just get right into it. Try and relax and sink into whatever position you're in. So, we're going to be reading some fairy tales. We're going to read the turnip right now, because to me that sounds like an interesting one. The turnip. There were two brothers who were both soldiers. The one was rich and the other poor. The poor man thought he would try to better himself. So pulling off his red coat, he became a gardener and dug his ground well and sowed turnips. When the seed came up, there was one plant bigger than all the rest, and it kept getting larger and larger, and seemed as if it would never cease growing, so that it might have been called the Prince of Turnips, for there never was such a one seen before, and never will again. At last it was so big that it filled the cart, and 2 oxen could hardly draw it, and the gardener knew not what in the world to do with it, nor whether it would be a blessing or a curse to him. One day he said to himself, "What shall I do with it? If I sell it, it will bring no more than another. And for eating, the little turnips are better than this. The best thing, perhaps, is to carry it and give it to the king as a mark of respect." Then he yoked his oxen and drew the turnip to the court and gave it to the king. I have seen many strange things, but such a monster as this I never saw. Where did you get the seed? Or is it only your good luck? If so, you are a true child of fortune. "Ah, no," answered the gardener. "I am no child of fortune. I am a poor soldier who never could get enough to live upon. So I laid aside my red coat and set to work, tilling the ground. I have a brother who is rich, and your majesty knows him well, and all the world knows him. But because I am poor, everybody forgets me." The king then took pity on him and said, "You shall be poor no longer. I will give you so much that you shall be even richer than your brother." Then he gave him gold and lands and flocks, and made him so rich that his brother's fortune could not at all be compared with his. When the brother heard of all this, and how the turnip had made the gardener so rich, he envied him sorely, and bethought himself how he could contrive to get the same good fortune for himself. However, he determined to manage more cleverly than his brother, and got together a rich present of gold and fine horses for the king, and thought he must have a much larger gift in return. For his brother had received so much for only a turnip. What must his present be worth? The king took the gift very graciously, and said he knew not what to give in return more valuable and wonderful than the great turnip. So the soldier was forced to put it into a cart and drag it home with him. When he reached home, he knew not upon whom to vent his rage and spite, and at length wicked thoughts came into his head, and he resolved to kill his brother. So he hired some villains to murder him, and having shown them where to lie the ambush, he went to his brother and said, "Dear brother, I have found a hidden treasure. Let us go and dig it up, and share it between us." The other had no suspicions of his roguery, so they went out together, and as they were traveling along, the murderers rushed out upon him, bound him, and were going to hang him on a tree. But whilst they were getting all ready, they heard the trampling of a horse at a distance. That they pushed their prisoner's neck and shoulders together into a sack, and swung him up by a cord to the tree, where they left him dangling, and ran away. Meantime he worked and worked away until he made a hole large enough to pull out his head. When the horseman came up, he proved to be a student, a merry fellow who was journeying along on his nag, and singing as he went. As soon as the man in the sack saw him passing under the tree, he cried out, "Good morning! Good morning to thee, my friend." The student looked about everywhere, and seeing no one, and not knowing where the voice came from, he cried out, "Who calls me?" Then the man in the tree answered, "Lift up thine eyes, for behold, here I sit in the sack of wisdom. Here have I in a short time learned great learned great and wondrous things. Compared to this seat, all the learnings of the school is as empty air. A little longer, and I shall know all that man can know, and shall come forth wiser than the wisest of mankind. Here I discern the signs and notions. Here I discern the signs and motions of the heavens and the stars, the laws that control the wind, the number of the sands on the seashore, the healing of the sick, the virtues of all the simples, of birds and of precious stones. Wert thou but once here, my friend, thou wouldst feel and own the power of knowledge. The student listened to all this and wondered much. At last he said, "Blessed be the day and the hour when I found you. Cannot you contrive to let me into the sack for a little while?" Then the other answered, as if very unwillingly, "A little space I may allow thee to sit here, and if thou wilt reward me well and entreat me kindly, but thou must tarry yet an hour below, till I have learnt some little manners that are yet unknown to me." So the student sat himself down and waited a while. But the time hung heavy upon him, and he begged earnestly that he might ascend forthwith, for his thirst of knowledge was great. Then the other pretended to give way, and said, "Thou must let the sack of wisdom descend by untying yonder cord, and then thou shalt enter." So the student let him down and opened the sack and set him free. "Now then," cried he, "let me ascend quickly," as he began to put himself into the sack, heels first. "Wait a while," said the gardener, "that is not the way." Then he pushed him in head first, tied up the sack, and soon swung up the searcher after wisdom dangling in the air. "How is it with thee, friend?" he said. "Dost thou not feel that wisdom comes into thee? Rest there in peace, till thou art a wiser man than thou wert." So saying, he trotted off with the student's knife, and left the poor fellow to gather wisdom until somebody should come along and let him down. There's a picture. And that was that story. There was one more I was going to read, but I have to remember which one it was. We'll read The Giant with the Three Golden Hairs. Let's see what this one's about. There was once a poor man who had and only son born to him. The child was born under a lucky star, and those who told his fortune said that his 14th year he would marry the king's daughter. It so happened that the king of that land, soon after his child's birth, passed through the village in disguise, and asked whether there was any news. "Yes," said the people, "a child has just been born, that they say is to be a lucky one, and when he is 14 years old, he is fated to marry the king's daughter." This did not please the king, so he went to the poor child's parents and asked them whether they would sell him their son. "No," they said, but the stranger begged very hard and offered a great deal of money, and they had scarcely bread to eat. So at last they consented, thinking to themselves, "He is a luck's child. He can come to no harm." The king took the child and put it into a box and rode away. And when he came to a deep stream, he threw it into the current and said to himself, "That young gentleman will never be my daughter's husband." The box, however, floated down the stream, and some kind spirit watched over it, so that no water reached the child. And at last, about 2 miles from the king's capital, it stopped at the dam of a mill. The miller, who soon saw it, took a long pole and drew it towards the shore. Finding it heavy, thought there was gold inside, but when he opened it, he found a pretty little boy that smiled upon him merrily. Now the miller and his wife had no children, and therefore rejoiced to see their prize, saying, "Heaven has sent it to us." So they treated it very kindly and brought it up with such care that everyone admired and loved it. About 13 years passed over their heads, when the king came by accident to the mill, and asked the miller if that was his son. "No," he said, I found him when a babe in a box in the mill dam." "How long ago?" asked the king. "Some 13 years," replied the miller. "He is a fine fellow," said the king. "Can you spare him to carry a letter to the queen? It will please me very much, and I will give him 2 pieces of gold for his trouble." "As your majesty pleases," answered the miller. Now the king had soon guessed that this was the child whom he had tried to drown, and he wrote a letter by him to the queen, saying, "As soon as the bearer of this arrives, let him be killed and immediately buried, so that all may be over before I return." The young man set out with his letter, but missed his way, and came in the evening to a dark wood. Through the gloom he perceived a light at the distance, towards which he directed his course, and found that it proceeded from a little cottage. There was no one within except an old woman who was frightened at seeing him, and said, "Why do you come hither, and whither are you going?" "I am going to the queen, to whom I was to have delivered a letter, but I have lost my way, and shall be glad if you will give me a night's rest." "You are very unlucky," said she, "for this is a robber's hut, and if the band returns while you are here, it may be worse for you." I am so tired, however, he replied, that I must take my chance for it. I can go no further. So he laid the letter on the table, stretched himself out upon a bench, and fell asleep. When the robbers came home and saw him, they asked the old woman who the strange lad was. I have given him shelter for charity, she said. He had a letter to carry to the queen and lost his way. The robbers took up the letter, broke it open, and read the directions which it contained to murder the bearer. Then their leader tore it and wrote a fresh one, desiring the queen, as soon as the young man arrived, to marry him to the king's daughter. Meantime, they let him sleep on till morning broke, and then showed him the right way to the queen's palace, where, as soon as she had read the letter, she had all possible preparations made for the wedding, and as the young man was very beautiful, the princess took him willingly for her husband. After a while the king returned, and when he saw the prediction fulfilled, and that this child of fortune was, notwithstanding all his cunning, married to his daughter, he inquired eagerly how this had happened, and what were the orders which he had given. "Dear husband," said the queen, "here is your letter. Read it for yourself." The king took it, and seeing that an exchange had been made, asked his son-in-law what he had done with the letter which he had given him to carry. "I know nothing of it," answered he. "It must have been taken away in the night while I slept." Then the king was very wroth, and said, "No man shall have my daughter who does not descend into the wonderful cave and bring me 3 golden hairs from the head of the giant who reigns there. Do this, and you will have my consent." "I will soon manage that," said the youth. So he took his leave of his wife and set out on his journey. At the first city that he came to, the guard of the gate stopped him and asked him what trade he followed and what he knew. "I know everything," he said. "If that may be so," replied they, "you are just the man we want. Be so good as to tell us why our fountain in the marketplace is dry, and will give no water. Find out the cause of that, and we will give you 2 asses loaded with gold." "With all my heart," he said, "when I come back." Then he journeyed on and came to another city, and there the guard also asked him what trade he followed and what he understood. "I know everything," answered he. "Then pray do us a piece of service," said they. "Tell us why a tree which used to bear us golden apples now does not produce a leaf." "Most willingly," he answered, "as I come back." At last his way led him to the side of a great lake of water, over which he must pass. A ferryman soon began to ask, as the others had done, what was his trade, and what he knew. "Everything," he said. "Then," said the other, "pray inform me why I am bound forever to ferry over this water, and have never been able to get my liberty, I will reward you handsomely. I will tell you all about it, said the young man, as I come home. Then he had passed the water, he came to the wonderful cave, which looked terribly black and gloomy. But the wizard king was not at home, and his grandmother sat at the door in her easy chair. What do you seek? She said. 3 golden hairs from the giant's head, he answered. He. You run a great risk, said she, when he returns home, yet I will try what I can do for you. Then she changed him into an ant, and told him to hide himself in the folds of her cloak. Very well, said he, but I want to also know why the city's fountain is dry, why the tree that bore golden apples is now leafless, and what it is that binds the ferryman to his post. Those are 3 puzzling questions, said the old dame. But lie quiet and listen to what the giant says when I pull the golden hairs. Presently night set in, and the old gentleman returned home. As soon as he entered, he began to snuff up the air and cried, All is not right here. I smell a man's flesh. Then he searched all around in vain, and the old dame scowled and said, Why should you turn everything topsy-turvy? I have just set all in order. Upon this he lay his head in her lap and soon fell asleep. As soon as he began to snore, she seized one of the golden hairs and pulled it out. Mercy, he cried, starting up. What are you about? I had a dream that disturbed me, she said, and in my trouble I seized your hair. I dreamt that the fountain in the marketplace of the city became dry and would give me no water. But what can be the cause? Ah, if they could find that out, they would be glad, said the giant. Under a stone in the fountain sits a toad. When they kill him, it will flow again. This said, he fell asleep, and the old lady pulled out another hair. What would you be at? Cried he in a rage. Don't be angry, said she. I did it in my sleep. I dreamt that in a great kingdom there was a beautiful tree that used to bear golden apples, and now has not even a leaf upon it. What is the reason for that? Aha, said the giant. They would like very well to know that secret. At the root of the tree a mouse is gnawing. If they were to kill him, the tree would bear golden apples again. If not, it will soon die. Now let me sleep in peace. If you wake me again, you shall rue it. Then he fell once more asleep, and when she heard him snore, she pulled out the 3rd golden hair, and the giant jumped up and threatened her sorely. But she soothed him and said, It was a strange dream. Methought I saw a ferryman who was fated to ply backwards and forwards over a lake, and could never be set at liberty. What is the charm that binds him? A silly fool, said the giant. If he were to give the rudder into the hand of any passenger, he would find himself at liberty, and the other would be obliged to take his place. Now let me sleep. In the morning the giant arose and went out, And the old woman gave the young man the 3 golden hairs and reminded him the answers to his 3 questions and sent him on his way. He soon came to the ferryman, who knew him again and asked for the answer which he had promised him. "Ferry me over first," he said, and then I will tell you." When the boat arrived to the other side, he told him to give the rudder to any of his passengers, and then he might run away as soon as he pleased. The next place he came to was the city where the barren tree stood. "Kill the mouse," he said, "that gnaws the root, and you will have golden apples again." They gave him a rich present, and he journeyed on to the city where the fountain had dried up. The guard demanded his answer to their question, so he told them how to cure the mischief, and they thanked him and gave him 2 ashes laden with gold. And now at last this child of fortune reached home, and his wife rejoiced greatly to see him and to hear how well everything had gone with him. He gave the 3 golden hairs to the king, who would no longer raise any objection to him. And when he saw all the treasure carried out in a transport of joy, "Dear son, where did you find all this gold?" "By the side of the lake," said the youth, "where there is plenty more to be had." "Pray tell me," said the king, that I may go and get some too." "As much as you please," replied the other. "You will see the ferryman on the lake. Tell him to carry you across, and there you will see gold, as plentiful as sand upon the shore." Away went the greedy king, and when he came to the lake, he beckoned to the ferryman, who took him onto the boat, and as soon as he was there, gave the rudder into his hand and sprung ashore, leaving the old king to ferry away as the reward of his sins. And is his majesty playing there to this day? You may be sure of that, for nobody will trouble himself to take the rider out of his hand. So there are those 2 stories, and that is all for today. I hope you're feeling nice and sleepy.